All right, let's talk about a single, absolutely pivotal day in history, April 19th, 1775. This is the day a simmering protest boiled over into open conflict, the day a few scattered skirmishes lit the fuse on the American Revolution. It's the story of how one shot really did change the world. So, let's get into it.
You've probably heard these famous lines from Ralph Waldo Emerson. They so perfectly captured the dramatic peak of our story. But that legendary shot heard round the world, well, that wasn't the beginning. To really understand how we ended up at that bridge in Concord, we've got to rewind a bit and look at how that fuse was lit in the first place. So picture this. It's 1775, and Massachusetts is basically a pressure cooker. The tensions between the American colonists and the British Crown, over stuff like taxation without representation, they're at an absolute fever pitch. The whole colony is just teetering on the edge of all-out rebellion. To try and get a lid on things, the British sent in General Thomas Gage. But his attempts to enforce what the colonists angrily called the intolerable acts just threw gasoline on the fire. By April of 75, Gage felt like his back was against the wall. He came up with a plan. If he could just march out and seize the militia's weapons and gunpowder, he figured he could snuff out the rebellion before real war ever started. So on the night of April 18th, about 800 British regulars slip out of Boston, under the cover of darkness. The mission was simple, really. First, march to Lexington and grab Patriot leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Second, push on to the town of Concord and destroy all the weapons and ammo the colonists had stockpiled there. It was designed to be a quick, clean, secret operation. But here's the thing about secrets in Boston back then. They didn't stay secret for long. The Patriots had this incredible intelligence network, and they got wind of the plan almost right away. So as the British troops started to march, riders like the famous Paul Revere and William Dawes took off, galloping through the countryside to sound the alarm. Church bells started ringing, guns were fired into the air as signals. So much for the element of surprise. And that brings us to the wee hours of April 19th. The sun's just starting to come up, and this long column of British redcoats marches right into the center of a little town called Lexington. And what's waiting for them on the village green? Just 70 colonial militiamen. Think about that. 70 farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers led by a man named Captain John Parker, standing up to a professional army that outnumbered them more than 10 to 1. They weren't there to win a battle. They were there to make a stand. And Captain Parker's orders to his men, wow, they tell you everything you need to know. He's saying, don't you dare fire first. He's putting the burden of starting this thing squarely on the British. But he's also showing this unbelievable resolve. It's like he's saying, if they mean to have a war, then this is the place and this is the time. And in that incredibly tense moment, a shot rang out. And to this very day, nobody knows for sure who fired it. The Americans swore the British fired unprovoked. The British swore they were shot at from behind a nearby wall. What we do know is what happened next. The British soldiers opened fire with a full volley. And when the smoke cleared, 8 Americans lay dead or dying. First blood was drawn. Leaving the tragedy on Lexington Green behind them, the British column continued their march. Their main objective, remember, was Concord. But because of those midnight riders, the entire countryside was now awake, and armed men were heading towards Concord from all directions. By the time the British got to Concord, hundreds of militiamen had gathered on a hill overlooking the North Bridge. And as they're watching the British troops, they see smoke rising from the middle of town. Now, the British were just burning some weapon supplies they'd found, but from a distance, it looked like the redcoats were torching their homes. For the men on that hill, that was it. That was the last straw. The time for watching was over. The commanders turned to Captain Isaac Davis and asked if his men from the town of Acton would lead the charge down to the bridge. His answer was so simple, so direct, and so powerful. I haven't a man that's afraid to go. The mood had completely shifted. They weren't just making a statement anymore. They were marching down to fight. As the Minutemen got closer, the British fired a warning volley, and then another. Captain Davis was hit and killed instantly. Seeing their comrade fall, Major John Buttrick of Concord yelled the command they'd all been waiting for. The colonists raised their muskets and fired a disciplined, deadly volley of their own. That exchange of fire right there at the North Bridge, that is the shot heard round the world. That volley from the colonists absolutely stunned the British troops at the bridge. They broke ranks and ran back to the main force. The British commander, realizing he was outnumbered and had failed to find most of the weapons, gave the order to retreat. And what came next was one of the most harrowing, brutal retreats you can imagine. The 12-mile march back to Boston turned into a 6-hour-long running nightmare for the British. By now, thousands of militiamen from nearly 30 different towns had swarmed the area. And this is where you see this incredible clash of fighting styles. The British were trained to fight in neat lines on open fields. But here, the colonists used the landscape they knew like the back of their hands, firing from behind every tree, every stone wall, every building. It was an absolute slaughter. And the numbers really tell the story of just how brutal that day was. The colonists suffered 93 casualties, but the British, a staggering 300 men killed, wounded, or missing. For what was then the most powerful army on Earth, this was a shocking and humiliating defeat. The news of the fight spread like wildfire, and the colonial response was immediate and massive. In the days that followed, an incredible army of 20,000 militiamen from all over New England marched to Boston and completely surrounded the city, trapping General Gage and his entire army inside. A protest had officially become a war. The siege of Boston was on. So let's just let that sink in. A mission that was carefully designed to prevent a war by taking away a few weapons had, in the span of less than 24 hours, done the exact opposite. It kicked off an 8-year struggle that would ultimately lead to the creation of the United States of America. The story of Lexington and Concord just shows how quickly things can spin out of control. And it forces us to ask this huge question that people have grappled with throughout history. Where is the tipping point? When does simply standing your ground on a village green turn into a full-blown fight for independence? It's definitely something to think about.